to another video. Now today in this video I am going to walk you through all the steps of making this dress, and it's like a Wednesday Addams inspired look about it. I'm sorry this is printed out in black and white, I didn't print this out in colour. Now this pattern is a paid pattern. You have to buy the pattern from a designer called My Little Doll Story from Etsy. Now I'm not affiliated with My Little Doll Story, I don't even know the designer's name, and she doesn't know I'm doing this video, but I just said I was going to do a bit of a walkthrough of this pattern, and yeah, and I've pre-recorded it, so I've already done it. I've just got to put those pieces of video together and then I'll come back to you at the end with my finished dress. Now I have made this dress before I made this one, which I'll wait to the end to show you. This is an example of it. Basically I made the dress and I omitted the collar, so when you were supposed to put the collar in I just didn't do that, carried on with the next step. And when I cut out my fabric I cut it out at the longer length, because there's two options. If you do it the cuff, you do a shorter length, and if you do without the cuff you do a long, and that's what I did. Now with this pattern, your opening you put press studs and then you can put fake buttons on. That's what the designer suggests, but I'll let you into a little secret. Can you see some little white dots? I've marked where they're supposed to go, but I'll show you that again in a moment when I've got two hands free. But I've not put anything on there. I'm not selling this dress or anything, I'm just keeping it. This is my little my character. So yeah, so basically because it overlaps, it just sits on there perfectly. And how you put this dress on is that you have to remove your smart doll's head, and I removed her hands, and then I put both arms up in the air like this, and then I slid the dress over the top and then put her arms back down and then popped her head on. As simple as that. And as I say, it doesn't even need any snaps sewn on, so you know, don't even, if it's for yourself, don't even waste your money, it sits there perfectly. But I'll show you again in a moment. Now this is what the dress looks like with the collar and the cuffs. Now as I say, I've already made it like this, but I don't want to show you until the very end. But I'll show you the line drawing. This is how the dress looks, the one that I'm going to be making in a moment. It has two darts at the front, so you sew those first, but I'll tell you all this anyway. And that's the back. So you could, if you didn't want to slide it over your doll, you could have your skirt piece, cut it into two, but you'd need to leave extra so you could have, you know, have an overhang and things. So it'd be like this one here, so you'd have to add to your pattern. But which I would be tempted to do, but it does look really pretty. It looks like a human dress from the back. It's got that kind of finish about it. But if you nobody ever sees your dolls from the back, or you only take photos and things and you're never going to see the back of it, it probably wouldn't matter, would it, if it had Velcro or something all the way down to the bottom. But I've made the second dress as it was intended to be made, like this one. And yeah, and I'm going to put it on, and I've put it on my doll, but you're going to see at the end. So is there anything else I need to tell you? Now I will admit I filmed the make along in my kitchen. It starts off one evening and then I carry on the next day, and the first evening I'm having a bit of a cat attack and a dog barking, but I think you get the gist. Anyway, so yeah, apologies for that, but I hope you enjoy it anyway. Now I've got the back page, because I'm not going to be sewing anything on the back of this dress to show you in this make along. I'll just show you on the pattern. They've put pressed along the back, and they've even put one on the collar. But and they've put just sewed buttons on just for effect. But as I say, you really don't need it. If I just turn little Mai around, little Mai, let's turn your head. Turn her head out the way. Look at this. it just sits there beautifully. Just move her arm away. Now the her tights, they're not quite tights, are they, Missy? Should we tell them? Basically, they're a bit of an illusion. I've made thigh-high socks. So what happens is, even though this is all uber short, this dress, when she's sitting, kneeling, standing, they look like tights. And it was just a bit of a cheat because it saves me having to bother sewing in the waistband and things like that, which I don't mind doing, but why bother when you can just have the illusion? Now these are, it's fabric for my old leggings that have been washed many times. I don't think they will stain her, but it's always recommended that you don't leave one outfit on a doll for prolonged periods, not unless you've got like protection underneath them. But I haven't had any problems with these, and she had them on for days and she was fine. Although she is a tanned skin, I think tanned are a little bit more forgiving, and she wore this red dress for days, but I pre-wash all my fabrics anyway. So anyway, I am going to send you over to my make along, making the Wednesday inspired dress, and we're going to put it on another doll because little Mai, she's got hers, hasn't she? And maybe I'll come back to you at the very end. I do say my goodbyes in that piece of video out in my garden, but yeah, maybe the current day me will come back. I'm not sure. I'll see when I've edited the video. So I'll send you over to that video now, and I hope you enjoy it. I'll see you there. So we've chosen our pattern, and I've already got it printed out, and I've already backed it and things so I can draw around it, because I've made this pattern before with some modifications. Now Buttons, my cat, is licking my fingers and he's butting the phone. Sorry, but see, he's butting it. But as you can see here, I've already pre-washed my fabrics. I overlock them before I put them in the washing machine, and I've got some white for my collar and cuffs. So anyway, let me sort this cat out. Buttons. Now normally with paper patterns you can fold your grain line and then you can make sure you're on the straighter grain. However, I've backed mine on cereal packets, so I can't do that. So I have drew a line with an iron off pen. Now bear in mind, if you go to sub-zero temperatures, these lines can come back. Basically, line them up on the straight of grain. Let me try and do this. Like that, so we will know then this will be on the straight of grain. So I have drew around the collar piece. Now let me move this so you can see there, and the cuffs, they've got a grain line on them too, and there's 4 of those, so I'm going to draw a line. I'm going to draw 4 of those. Now this is Editing Claire talking to you. Now as you can see here, I've only traced round the collar piece 1 time. Please do that 2 times. I can get away with only doing the cuffs twice because I'm going to back them, but the collar needs to be folded. Now the lines that you see are they're the sewing line, apart from this line here will cut along that line, and this is a cutting line, but the other lines are all sewing lines. But you do that when it is backed. So I've got some lightweight backing that I'm going to use. I'm not going to use this fabric as the backing. Welcome back. Now I went on ahead and I cut out all my other pieces. So I cut out the back skirt piece, the front piece, and mark in the darts. This is the back piece. You cut 2 of those and you mark these because you have to fold these, because a part of this is going to be the facing. I've cut out a front facing, and now I've cut this out in like a cotton organdy, but I've done it in white. I have got some black. Black probably would have been better on this project. So I might end up cutting this out again later on. I'll just see how it looks. And I've got 2 sleeves. Now I've cut them at the slightly shorter length. That was, you do it at the longer length if you're not going to use a cuff. Shorter length with the cuff. I've made this dress once before and I made it without the cuff and I omitted the collar, because the dress I was making didn't need a collar. Now regarding these, I later noticed that there are 2 collar pieces. So you can cut this on the fold or you cut it out in one piece. I did it in one piece, but what I do know is later on we're going to be cutting this in half. And I don't know if it's going to have a raw edge at the back. I'll need to check the pattern because I haven't made this dress with the collar. I've only made it without the collar and without the cuffs. So I'm going to have to refer to the instructions to see what this designer has in mind for it. Hello, this is Editing Claire with you again. Now, I did the collar slightly wrong when I filmed this video. I drew around here and I backed it and I made my collar accidentally a little bit smaller than it was supposed to, smaller that way. Now it did turn out okay in the end, it was no issue, but I don't want to tell you the wrong way, so I'm going to redo this, but I'll pretend that this kitchen paper is fabric. So you've got a choice whether you use the one on the fold or the one without the fold. Now if you use the one with the fold, what you would do is you would fold your fabric, place your pattern piece on the fold like this, and you would trace around it like that, and you would do that 2 times because you've got 2 collars. Now if you're using plain fabric, it wouldn't matter which side you sew this. So with the pretty sides facing, I used white so it didn't matter. What you would do with this collar piece is you would literally stitch on this line. You would sew on that line around here and around to here and stop here. This is a cutting line, so I'll put some scissors. You'd cut there. And you do the same with this. You'd sew from here to here, so you go forwards and backwards, and this is a cutting line. And those are your 2 collars. And you would trim your edges, trim all your edges out, and then flip them through and iron them. And those are your 2 collar pieces. So all the difference with my collar pieces is my sewing line was about here. So mine end up being a teensy bit smaller than what they were supposed to be. So it just means when I line them up for fitting them, I just have to be mindful of that. So I just didn't want you to have to worry about this. So if you was to use this piece, what you would do, pretend we haven't drew on the back of that. You would draw, obviously there's a grain line, so let me pretend there's a grain line here. Which side shall I do it? Do it over here. So you can see the way your fabric runs, the grain line. So that's going to be our grain line. So we will line up on the grain line like this. And we'd trace around it. Like that, and you do that a second time. So I'll line up the grain lines going along here. I don't know if you can see the grain line on camera, but I can see the pretend grain line anyway. So, and with these, what we'd do, we'd have to cut them out with some seam allowance. Now, like I say, allow some seam allowance. I didn't leave much of a space between these 2 pieces. Now this line is a cutting line, so you don't need to worry about leaving any excess. with that piece. Okay, there's one. Okay, I've cut the collar pieces out. Now, the cutting line I've cut on the cutting line, but I've left seam allowance between these. Now you fold them in half, both of them, like this. And then what you do is, you do like what we did on the others. Sew forward and backwards here, stitch along this line, pivot, stitch along this line, forward and back, and that's your sewing done. And then we'll pretend this is sewn. Now you're going to see me do this later on in the video when I do mine wrong, but you're going to clip all your corners to reduce the bulk like that. And I even get some pinking shears down mine round this curve. So hopefully that clears things up. So when you see me doing the sewing of the collar later on, bear in mind you've seen the correct way you're doing it before you get to that piece of video. But when I insert the collar, then I realise that I've done mine a bit smaller, and then, you know, but just refer back to this when you make your collar. So, shall we get sewing? The exciting bit. I did all my cutting out last night with great difficulty, as you probably remember. And yeah, so I'm going to sew today. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to sew. We'll pin the darts and sew them. So we're going to pin them from this side because this is where we've marked them. What I might do is, to make this a tad easier, is get some scissors. And I'm going to snip the line like that. And I'll do it on the other side as well. So now I can see the little cut. I'm going to pin it this direction because that's I want to sew from this way to this way. No, it's not right. We'll just keep going. Let's try this. Ah, yes, the first one's right. Let's try the second. So see, we've done it this time, but can you see this takes a bit of faff sometimes getting it right. Now let's do this side. Let's move this over a little. Let's check it. Not bad. Not bad at all. Not quite right, but not too bad. So if I look, sometimes you can turn it over, pin through there, and then pin through there. Sort of cheated, but we've done it. So now we have to sew from the outside in. Now, sew forward and backwards at the beginning, but when you get to the middle of the dart, do not go forward and backwards because you have a Madonna boob. Sew off the edge and leave some thread, and then tie a knot just a little bit away from the fabric, and then it will be just a little bit softer. You won't be so pointed. So I'm back from the sewing machine, and I've sewn both of those darts in the way that I showed you to. Now we're going to tie the knots. So you grab your two threads with one hand, and you will need a pin, and you make a loop, but don't pull the loop tight because you need to insert your pin into the loop. Now I'm going to show you this really, really slowly. Can you see that loop? Just keep your pin. Now you put your pin where you want your knot to sit. So then you start to pull your tails. So I'm doing this extremely, extremely slow for you to see. And then it will go tight around the pin. and then you can remove your pin, and there's your knot, just a little bit away from the fabric. That's probably about 1 centimetre or ½ an inch or something. So I haven't left the tails very long on this side, so it made it a bit more tricky to grab, but it still can be done, so just make sure you leave enough. Do a loop and pull it through, but don't pull it tight. Put your pin in the loop and put your pin where you want your knot to be, which is just a little bit away from the fabric, and then pull the end, and then you get a knot like that. It's got 2 knots here, and then just trim the excess off. Then we need to iron these darts down. Actually, I've got some threads here, I'll trim off now. So if I open this out, and then now we've got the shaping of the bust, but just go to the iron and iron those in a downwards direction, and that will iron off those little marks that we made earlier. Okay, now we're going to work on these back pieces, and we need to do some folds. Now I've marked the point of fold on this side, but I haven't on the other side because we cut them out in mirror image. So I'm flipping my pattern piece over like this. I'm not going to mark the buttons on because once I iron this, those are going to disappear anyway. So my marks are on there. So we're going to fold. You can draw a line if you prefer. Find those little marks and do that. I'm just going to put a pin in there so I know where it is. I'm going to take that over to the iron, and then I'll do it with the other side. So I've been to the ironing board and I've ironed those pieces back. Now we are going to be sewing the shoulder seams to the piece that we've already sewn the darts on. So we get our front piece and we put it the right way up so the darts are facing the work top. Now that is the right side of the back piece, so we have to put that face down and line it up with the shoulder. Now the little flappy piece that we've ironed, you do not sew that down with the shoulder. So you place both sides, but you flip that out and you just pin the shoulder and you sew these 2 shoulder seams, just making sure that folded bit is out of the way because you're going to be using that for another bit next. Now take this to the sewing machine and stitch these down. Now something I forgot to mention about this pattern, when I printed it out, there was 2 front bodices, there was 2 of everything, and I didn't understand why, and it's because this designer has given us 2 different seam allowances. So I think I'm doing the 1/4 inch seam allowance, but there was another one, I think a 5mm one, but I just chose the one that I'd already started to cut out. So it's a really good idea to put this pattern under your sewing machine and see that you're going to do this perfect seam allowance, because you're going to need it for doing this back facing piece. So now we've sewn in these shoulders. We might have to seal the edges of these because I haven't fray checked this or anything, bear with me. I've referred to the pattern and the designer wants you to overlock the edge of these just to stop them fraying. However, I've decided I'm going to fray check these. I'm not going to fray check this whole project, but I am going to fray check these shoulders because they're only small. And I'll trim, while it's drying, I will trim these excess threads off. Now we're going to pin this facing. Now bear in mind that's the outside of your garment, so you're going to place this on here, so when we flip it, that will be the right way as well. And we get this side, and we're going to sew the edges of this with the same seam allowance. There and there. Now I have sewed those seams and I've pressed them open. Now the designer wants you to finish the edge of this all the way around here. So I go down to my garden room and I decide to overlock this edge. Now I am back from my garden room and I've overlocked all round that curve. Now I'm not sure what's going to happen next, so I just decide to tie a little knot in my overlocked edge. I just do it a bit like how I sewed the dart. I do a little loop, I use a pin and I pull, and I do it quite close to the edge of the fabric, and then I just trim. I do both sides and then I trim the edges off. Now I decide to sew my cuffs and my collar, but regarding the collar, refer back to what I showed you in that previous bit of video. Sew the cuffs on these edges, but leave the long straight edge because that's the cutting line. This is the moment that I find the small collar piece, and I realise that I've made my collar a little bit smaller than it was supposed to be, but you can refer back to how we were supposed to do that earlier on, but it all turns out okay in the end. So now I cut out my collar pieces and my cuff pieces. Now I decide on the curve of the collar, I decide to cut very close to the stitch line with my pinking shears. But do go very carefully to not cut your stitches. Now, in the event that you do cut your stitches, you might not realise you've done it until after you've flipped your project through. You can either push those little edges back in with a pin and glue them or something, or flip your work back out and just stitch over it again. It's not a massive deal, but it is better if you don't do that in the first place. Now, as you can see here, I'm cutting the corners right down because this will make the collar stitch much nicer when I flip it out. Then repeat this on the other collar piece. Now we have two pieces trimmed down, and now it's time to trim the cuff pieces. I use scissors to cut along the line that I drew where there's no stitching. Then I switch over to my pinking shears and I cut round the edges with those, and then I trim extra bulk with my scissors on the corners and where I think there's extra bulk that we don't need. Repeat that on the other cuff piece. Now it's time to turn the cuffs the right way out and press them. I am using a prim turning tool just to start this process off. It just makes this process a little bit easier than trying to do it with your fingers. Push out your corners very gently because you don't want to break the stitches. Repeat this on the other collar piece. Now repeat this process to your cuffs. After I press mine, I decide to add a little bit of fray check just on the edges, just so there's no fraying when I continue working with them. Now it's time to insert our collar pieces. So I'm laying them on my fabric and I'm referring to the pattern to see where they go. Now this is when I realise that my collar pieces might be a little bit shorter. Now the pattern says to line the edge of your collar up to that folded piece. Do you remember the piece that we ironed in before? It wants you to, that's your starting point. But I realise because my collar pieces are a little bit shorter, if I do that, the gap might be too big in the middle. So because of mine being smaller, I have to find my centre edge of my dress. And I use that as my guide, and I bear in mind that my collar pieces won't go as far round at the back as they would have done if I'd made the collar pieces correctly. I make a small snip in the centre to mark my centre spot. I also decide to use a white iron-off pen to mark that centre spot so it's very obvious. Now I'm ready to hand tack my collar into place. So I'm just like eyeballing it at the moment. I have a look through my threads and I find this cotton reel with not much left on it. It's not much point using it on my sewing machine, so it's perfect for these kind of jobs for hand stitching. I tie a knot at the end of my thread and then I pull it down the thread. So when I put it through my fabric, it will stay in place. Now these are just temporary stitches, so I want to do some big stitches that I'm able to get my seam ripper into later when I don't need them anymore. I repeat this process on the other side. Then I flip the back facing over the top of the collar and it folds on the edge the opposite way to how we ironed the fold down on the facing. I pin it all in place and we are going to be sewing all the way around this edge. When it is sewn, it will look like this. Now you need to trim into it, so to ease it in, do a few little snips and cut your corners. I decide to cut my excess bulk with my pinking shears. And to make doubly sure that this is going to turn out nicely, I snipped really close to my stitches with my scissors. Now I'm going to flip my dress the right way out and I use a little tool to just push out those corners. But again, remember to do this very gently, but if anything was to happen, do not worry, it can be fixed. And also bear in mind, if your collar was a little bit wider, it might go right up to that edge. There might be not as much overhang as what I've got. The pattern suggests that we fold the collar over and make a crease just so it's standing up a little bit away from the seam. Repeat this fold on the other collar. And use your iron to press this in place, and now your collar will look like this. Now I'm ready for a bit of a snack. It's hungry work. Okay, this is how we're looking so far. We're on the mannequin. I've just pinned it at the back. So we've got some stitches we've got to take out, the temporary stitches. The next stage will be you kind of overlap the back to the markings on the pattern, and then you sew the bottom skirt on, and then you edge stitch it and iron it down. So yeah, we're going to move on. And here's Kitty and Mirai. Mirai says, "Ba-da-ba." So Kitty was my first smart doll, and Mirai is my most recent smart doll. Now, had I have gone down the route of buying my first smart doll from the Smart Doll website, I would have hands down had Mirai as my first. But I didn't get my doll. If you watch my video, my first one, my friend offered me a smart doll body to buy, and but this is not, Kitty's not on it now. She's on a full vinyl body. She's had an upgrade. So Mirai's sister, her younger sister, Little Mai's actually on the original body that I bought. So so anyway, we've had a bit of a pastry stop, a bit naughty, I know. So shall we get back sewing? So here is the back piece of the skirt. Now I'm just showing you on the pattern pieces. It shows you how much you've got to fold over. So if you see your folding line, you line those up with the opposite side. It may seem confusing, but it's really quite simple. I didn't have any confusion the first time I did this on my Little Mai's dress, and it wasn't difficult this time either. Now I pop a pin in place just so that doesn't move, and then I will get the other side and I will get that to overhang. You have to find the mark on the opposite side. Then we'll be taking this over to the sewing machine, sewing it, edge stitching it and flipping it over and ironing it down. The pattern also wants you to edge stitch all your side seams front and back, the bottom of the sleeve and at the side of the sleeves. Now it's time to do some gathering stitches across the top of the sleeves. I decide to do this by hand because my dad comes to visit. However, I decide that it's going to be a lot easier to do those gathering stitches if I do a little bit of tidying up. So I decide to tie off all these loose ends from my overlock threads. Okay, the pattern doesn't say to do this, but I'm going to stitch down the shoulder seam, either directly in the seam or either side of it. If I go, I'll go on the back if I do it on the side. Then I'm going to basically be tacking the facing down so it stays in place. And there's another thing you can do. You can also do some, the pattern doesn't say this either, you can do some understitching all the way around here as well, but you'd have to do that before this, just to make that sit a little bit flatter as well. I did actually decide to do this understitching on the collar, and then I stitched my shoulders. And here are my gathered edges of my sleeves, which I did by hand. Now it's time to insert the sleeves, but I do some tiny little snips all the way around the shoulder just to make that a tad easier on the sewing machine. Now pin the sleeve into the shoulder right side together and sew it down, and repeat on both sides. Now the pattern wants us to overlock or edge stitch round the shoulder. And then we're going to be sewing up the arms and down the side seams and then hemming. So yeah, I'll come back to you in a moment. Right, I'll tell you where we're at now. So I have overlocked these seams. Now I'm sure I've said to you, you can choose what you could use: an overlocking stitch, you could zigzag, you can fray check. All of these overlocked edges, I'm just using the overlocker because I have one and I really like the nice neat edge of it. Now I have used an overlock a long time. I know some people find them a bit, threading them up a bit scary and things, and I totally get it, but if you do know how to use it, you might as well use it. So I have basically sewn over this again. If you have a look, I've done the understitching and I've also stitched on top, just under here, all the way along, just to try and keep that neckband down. And I'm pretty confident when it's on the doll it will do that. Now the next stage is now normally with doll clothes I would sort out the sleeve, and I did when I made this before. I'd stitch it down now before I sew it up, but this wants you to sew in the cuff when the sleeve is together. So if I just get the my sleeve together, like, I don't know what happened there, it malfunctioned a bit, didn't it? But it's not going to be a problem. So I'm going to pin the cuff, and I continue pinning all the way down the arm right until the underarm, and then I continue pinning down the side seam. Repeat this on the other side. Now I overlock the bottom of the dress, I iron it up, and then I stitch it with the sewing machine to make a hem. Right, I've got the instructions over here. Now the instructions want us to make the cuffs. We've already made them. I have got a couple of little stains on here, but it is old recycled fabric. I'm not going to worry too much about it. So the it wants you to seal off your edges. I don't want to go down to the garden room again. It's dark. I just don't fancy it, but I put some fray check on here, so I'm not too fussed about it anyway. So now we're going to stitch we're going to pin the sleeves to start with. So I'm going to fold this in half. Now the pointy bit needs to be on the top. So where we've put this fold, now I've done a different kind of fabric underneath, so but that needs to be that way down because it's going to stay this side. So that fold I'm going to put on my seam. Now putting the first pin in is probably going to be the toughest. Sharp pins are probably useful. I did buy new pins and fine pins, but these yellow ones, and you know what, they're not fine, but they will do, but they're not the sharpest to use. I do have a bit of difficulty with them despite being new. Right, try and pin as close to the edge of this as we can. Oh dear. Right, now let's work this one round. So yeah, they're going to meet, and they're going to the seam allowance is going to be flipped inside anyway, so that's good. Let's have a look. Yeah, these will meet each other once stitched down. So I've got to hand tack. I'm going to do one at a time. So the instructions say to hand tack this in. I'll show you the picture. Hand tack it, and then that's going to be your you're basically going to do back stitch. So this is their forever stitching. It's not something you're going to take out, and then we're going to be flipping the seam inside the garment. So leave that with me. Right, I've nearly finished sewing this one cuff in, and I'm just doing back stitches, and I'm just eyeballing it, what I think is the seam allowance. I might be going a little bit off now because I'm trying to stand up in front of this camera. It's a lot better when I can just sit down and look at it in front of my face, but I thought I'll try and do a little bit for you on camera. So this is how we're going around like this, and we're nearly back at the beginning, so I'll come back to you then. Now the pattern says to flip this seam allowance inside of the garment. So I'll do that. And it says to fix them with several hand stitches. So I might have to do this from the inside. I think I know what to do. If I pull this out like this, like that, then I can tack it here and then flip it back out again. I think that's what the intention is. Right, I'll go and do that. Are you ready for the big reveal? Oh, Kitty, you look gorgeous. Oh, she's so lovely. Now, I'll share the hat pattern. I'll put it on the screen. I want to say Rad Patterns, but I know Rad Patterns make human clothes. So, yeah, I don't want to get any confusion. But, oh my goodness. This is going to be my first autumn. We're just heading into autumn. So I'm in my first autumn and Halloween with Smart Dolls. So it's so exciting. I made a lovely purple dress for Mirai. And I could always get little Mai in that red one that's the same dress as this, but without the collar and the cuffs. And I've added the bow. Oh, what do you think, Kitty? I've got these boots. I bought these off my friend. Do you know I keep going on about my friend Keely? Right? I've only chatted with her online with text, and her name's Kelly. Not Keely, but it might be a really hard habit to break. So I'm sorry about that, Kelly, that I've been calling you Keely for God knows how many years. I'm sure Beth said Kelly to me when I was at the BJD show. Beth runs them, and I'm sure I said to her something about, oh, is it Keely? She said she didn't know, and then I forgot all about it. So I hope you've really enjoyed this kind of sort of a sew along. It's kind of like you could sew along. There's no point watching me just sew straight lines, so I tried to instruct you on what happens next, and I had to figure it out as I went along. But so thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.
Talk to me, it's what I want the most in